I think this housing catastrophe we are in has impacted every part of society. It's how they're going to staff that new children's hospital is beyond me, because my school is right beside it and there is nowhere to buy or rent around there. It's extortionate, and like, I don't know where their staff are going to live. I don't know where they're going to get them. Doctors are off, all going to Australia or going to the Middle East or going wherever. Like, it's not a case where in previous generations, you know, people may emigrate, you know, to get some life experience or to have a few more opportunities.
No, they're going to live there, sure. But I have family over there. Ciarán, thanks for joining me today.
You're very welcome, Laura. Thanks for having me.
I came across your interesting Instagram page, Crazy House Prices, and I thought I have to get this fella on, because a lot of the time when I put out, say, a question box on my Instagram, I'll get people messaging me and going, my, you know, adult children are still living with me and I can't get them out because they can't buy a house. Or we hear about the unhappiness that people have with trying to find a house, trying to buy a house, and all the stuff that goes with it. So I have you on because you talk about that an awful lot. Should people be protesting on the streets at this stage? What do you think?
I think so, yeah. I don't know how we haven't got there. I think people are just exhausted, but
digging up the cobblestones, like, honestly, I don't see why they're not, because I think that we are just, there's almost like an acceptance now that it's okay for adult children, and it is okay for adult children to be living with their families if they want to, but a lot of them don't want to. They want to be out. It should
be a choice.
Yeah.
I did a poll on my page for renters, and over 15,000 renters responded, and I asked them, are you renting by choice or would you rather own your own home? And 96% of them said they weren't renting out of choice. They wanted to buy their own home. They just can't. There's so few homes available for people to buy, and if people are listening to this that follow me, they'll be like, Jesus, he's going on about this again. But that's everything boils back to that, as to how few homes are available every year for people to buy, because they've essentially just stopped building since the recession. And we hear about 30,000 homes being available being built every year, but last year only about 8,000 were available to buy. So
how is that broken down? Because that's what we hear, 30,000 were built. Why are only 8,000 available to buy? It's
broken down into the build to rent sector, and it's broken down into the state, and we need the state building and social housing and all that. But what's happening is the state are buying most of their social housing quota from the private market, which you and I can't compete with. We can't compete with the state, nor should we want to, because we have the highest homeless figures. As a teacher, seeing nearly 4,000 children homeless starting school next week from emergency accommodation is devastating to me. So in my opinion, the state should be building, but building rather than buying. But to go back to your question about the protesting, like, it's Housing Europe did a study, a really in-depth study a couple of years ago. Dara Turnbull is the Irish kind of person that's involved with it, and they go through everything to do with housing in Europe and in Ireland, and they released a report, then another one a couple of weeks ago, and both of them are very damning as to how government have handled housing policy here over the last couple of decades. And the Housing Europe thing, the first one they did a couple of years ago was about basically, you know, where we are in housing and how we got there. It's really in depth. It's really interesting to me. But the keynotes from it were, statistically, this generation, and I know every generation feels they're the most hard done by, but statistically this generation has it worse than any previous generation in terms of housing affordability and being able to buy their own home. So whenever I post things on Instagram, I tend to get, you know, the boomers saying how difficult it was back in their day, and you know those old stories. We all hear them from our previous generations.
My mum said they had no curtains in their house, the first house that they bought and stuff like that. Whereas now you buy a house and you want to have your bidet in your bathroom, as well as your curtains on your windows. But so the Housing Europe report goes into every little detail, and it kind of like preempts what
people are going to say and be like, but you know, we had 16% interest rates back then. It's like, yeah, but you had mortgage interest relief that you could claim off your taxes and all. So it goes into all of the details and all of the data. And the long story short is it is the most difficult now. And that was end of 2021, start of 2022. And it's only gotten worse since. So it's even worse now. And then they did another report about a month ago. And it goes into more in depth as to, as you spoke about at the start, how many people are living at home in their childhood rooms or living in their family home when they're in their 20s, 30s, 40s.
Even with their own little families as well.
Yeah. And we're the worst in Europe for that as well. So,
are we?
Yeah, we're the worst in Europe for a lot of things. As you know, energy prices, childcare, healthcare. And we are the worst for that. And one of the best is Denmark, but they 4% say living at home, and I think ours was well over 40%. Denmark invests heavily in their youth. It's nearly unheard of to be in your mid-20s over there and not own your own home, or to be living in your family home. And if you are, it's usually by choice, because they invest so heavily into that kind of supports for people to buy their own home at a young age. We just don't do that. Housing is a bit of a pyramid scheme in Ireland. It's how we build our wealth. It's how we look after ourselves as we get older. Pensions, all of that. It's everything. All of our wealth is tied up in property.
Yeah, that's the point. So say we talk with the boomers clinging on to their assets, for dear life, and their children not being able to buy houses because you might have an older couple in a 4-bed house. They're only using 1 bedroom. They don't probably need that space, but that's their family home that they are, they have a right to that home. They've paid for it and lived in it all their lives. And they might see that as their nursing home fund or their fund as they get older, because the pension isn't great. So it's almost like we need to flip the whole thing on its head, isn't it?
Yeah, and the pension crisis is only going to get worse because we're having less and less kids, less and less workers there that are going to be able to pay the pensions. It's a real ticking time bomb, and that's why the government are trying to bring in that mandatory pension, which I think is a great idea, because there's so many people who haven't even thought about their pension yet, and it'll be a little bit too late by the time they do. As they say, the best time to start your pension was yesterday. The second best time is today. Or whatever the phrase is, but you know what I mean. So there is that issue of people, but people are entitled, if that's their home,
of course,
they're entitled to stay in it. It shouldn't be a case where, because the reason that is a problem is because there are so few new homes being built, especially in the city. It's all apartments and it's all for rent, but there's so few actual homes for people to buy. So everybody is kind of trying to buy from the same finite stock of used houses or second-hand homes or whatever they're called, old houses. Like my house is 100 years old. So it's because there's nothing new, everybody is pooling into the one thing to try and buy in the same place. That's why demand is so high. And that supply can't increase because it's already built. They're the old houses, and you're basically it's morbid, but you're basically just waiting on people to die and then hope that the family don't keep it and they want to sell it. And that's all you're dealing with. I'm talking about Dublin in particular, but that's so many houses there's only so many old houses that you can buy. And when they're not building any new houses, supply is not increasing. So it does always come back to massive demand and a real shortage of supply, and that's what drives prices up and decreases affordability. Do
you think that we cling on too much though in this country to the family home that has to be a certain size with a back garden? Should we not be building up better spec apartments for people, have better amenities, better playgrounds, like the likes of other cities in Europe, for example, like Berlin, for example, or Paris, or these kind of cities that families live in smaller spaces, but they have better amenities too. Like, we need to take a real long-term view on all this too, because the density, the population is getting bigger. Well, although I suppose people are having less children, but there isn't enough space or high density areas either to be building these commuter belts for people that they're driving in and out of town for hours and ends, spending all their time commuting. So they're getting up, they're leaving their kids to crash, they're driving into Dublin or wherever they're commuting from, then they spend the hour driving home. They never get to see their kids. They're wrecked by the end of the week.
Yeah.
There's those people too.
Yeah, and it's way more common in other European countries to have families and to live in apartments in high density urban kind of areas, which would be fantastic. But if you look at those high density places, like they were built a long time ago, and they were built really well. And I feel in Ireland we have this, because apartments are fairly new here in recent decades, and there's just a bad kind of association with apartments because of the quality that of the build, because really the only apartments that are built have been over the last few decades, and we have a lot of legacy issues with the Celtic Tiger defects and you know, your apartments,
the ones that you couldn't swing a cat in,
and
you can hear
paper
your neighbour
walls
going
and,
for a wee.
whereas in Europe those apartments aren't like that, you know.
Yeah.
They're so solid and really well built, and they have loads of storage, loads of underground units. They're built differently, and because it is part of their culture to live in places like that, it's way more normal. Whereas we didn't start off like that. We started off with your 3-bed semi-Ds kind of things. So there's definitely an issue there in terms of long-term planning, as you said. And in my opinion, one of our bigger problems is that we think in such short cycles, because housing is so political here. And although we've had the same two parties in charge since the beginning of the state, it's 4-year terms, and they're and all they're thinking about is getting re-elected, and thinking in those 4 years, and then starting to worry, well, do you know, if we build something now that we really won't see the fruits of for a couple of generations or 20 or 30 years, sure, we're doing the work for whichever party's going to be in power
or
then.
even if they start at something now and it only comes to fruition in 5 to 10 years, they don't know where they're going to be in 5 to 10 years. Therefore, it's like they're not taking the glory for it. It'll be the government of the day that do.
Exactly. And that's,
so how do we change this?
Take housing out of politics, I think.
And how can that be done?
Easily, just so all parties then have to agree and say, this is our 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 year plan, when we're all going to be gone, but we need to think about the generations coming after us. And then everybody agrees. And then no matter who's in government, that's the plan. And that's what we're doing. So you don't have it. You can't stop that now. You can't change this plan. This is the plan that we've got the best minds in the world together to come up with this plan and think long term. Think of like the people who built the cities we have now. They built these things knowing that they will never see what it's going to become. They will never see the fruits of their labour. They won't see the oak tree they planted, but we get to enjoy it then 200 years later. That kind of long-term thinking is gone, because in politics it's just so, it's just so much about them and holding on to power, rather than, in my opinion anyway, rather than for the better of society. Because, as I said, Housing Europe have shown that this generation is worse off than the previous ones. So things aren't getting better. They're getting worse. Yeah. And I think that's a part of it. I
don't think you're the only one. I had Father Peter McVery on as well, and he was saying the same thing. But like Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, like they do have a terrible track record with housing unit delivery. Now they have announced bigger, bolder plans now, and delivery of targets, etc. But do you think they're just trying to steal Sinn Féin's thunder? Because Sinn Féin have been talking about this for ages. And do you think that if, with all the talk about the LDA, etc., is this another knee-jerk reaction? Do you see it coming to fruition, even what they're doing? Or do you think that things would change dramatically if Sinn Féin got in?
I don't know what would happen if Sinn Féin got in. I don't, like, I read every party's housing policies.
Do you? Like in bed at night and stuff? Does that interest you?
Yeah, it's just, I guess, like...
I'm only teasing.
Well, like, it's more just like, I think to be informed.
Of course.
But it's so hard to know everything about everything. Do you know that way? So I don't know how Sinn Féin will be on anything, health, education, the main pillars. And and on housing, like a lot of the parties before the last general election, a lot of the parties' housing manifestos, they're all pretty similar.
Build more.
Yeah, they're all pretty similar. But when's the last time that any party has ever actually delivered on their manifesto word for word? Should it get changed halfway through anyway?
Yeah.
So I don't know what Sinn Féin would do if and when they get in. I interviewed Darragh O'Brien, I interviewed Leo Varadkar, all about housing, and it's interesting. They were kind of a good bit of time apart, and every time you talk to them, they're saying, "But we're turning the corner." And I'm like, this is the longest corner I've ever seen.
It's been a 12-year corner.
Because how big is this corner? Because we haven't gotten around the bloody thing yet, because things are getting worse. Homeless numbers are worse. House prices are higher. Rent's at its highest in history in Ireland. So we're not turning the corner. I don't know what fucking corner they're talking about, but we're not. But
it's
really
not just
getting
political
there.
speak.
But it is. That's what they do, and that's their job.
Which is the unfortunate thing about it. Which is why that if we took housing out of the government, then it would be just something that everyone has to aspire to, and people just have to get the bloody job done.
That's what I think we should be doing, and less, not less reliance, but not like just solely relying on the private development market to build, but for the state to actually start to build on their own land. They can obviously do it cheaper because they don't have to buy the land, they already own it. Now anything the state does tends to cost more. Children's Hospital, perfect example. But if they already own the land, and if they can hire developers directly, the same thing we did in the 1920s, the 1930s, the 1940s, when we built Marino, Crumlin, the Tenters, all of these state-built areas, which are now in massive demand. We did that when we had no money.
Yeah,
but we could hire directly, and that's another issue that we have, is that the likes of those areas that I just said, they were built by the state, but they sold off all of their social housing stock and just didn't replace it. And that's really comes to the crux of the problem, because that's why we have such homeless figures. And now the state are pumping in billions and billions and billions into housing supports, and all that money is going to private developers. They're doing 25-year leases from private developers, and at the end we've no asset to show for it. Whereas we could have built it for less than that, and then you own the thing as a state. But because they haven't replaced the social housing stock that they sold off over the generations, we are now left with a conundrum where they need to house people. There's always going to be a need for social housing, but they're not building it, they're buying it. And that means then we are where we are, where people can't buy a home. And
do you think that they can deliver the public housing at scale? Or, is the private sector essential? Developers like, Michael O'Flynn, they're very vocal. They say the public sector, it doesn't have a hope of delivering cost-effective housing at scale. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
We definitely need a mix of both, but at the moment we're just relying on the neoliberal kind of stuff, the private policies, private developers. I do think we need private developers, and I think we need the state to develop as well.
Mm-hmm. Like not pinning all our hopes on the LDA, the Land Development Agency. And let private developers build away and kind of almost create a two-tier kind of property system. Dave McWilliams talks about that a lot. We need more of everything really, but we definitely need more homes for people to buy, and without that, prices aren't going to get any more affordable. And that then leads to, if people can't afford a home, whether it's to rent or to buy, that impacts every other facet of society. That impacts how we staff our hospitals, how we staff our schools, how we staff our guards, how we staff our restaurants, our supermarkets. So explain why,
because if you're a certain percentage of your income should be going on housing, it should be in around 25 to 30%, maybe 31, 32%.
On your mortgage or on your rent?
Yeah, okay. and that's of your take home.
Okay.
So not your gross, so actually your take home only around 30%.
Oh, sure, it's only the take home that matters, Ciarán.
But that's where our mortgages are kind of sitting around, but the rent is way more than that. So those people that are renting are kind of stuck in this kind of just horrible conundrum of so much of their money is going on rent. They've less disposable income, and then rents are only getting higher and higher, and then they're getting harder and harder to find somewhere to rent. So I kind of lost my train of thought there, but it's because we have made owning or living even so unaffordable, that impacts then everything, every part of life that impacts. As a teacher, I'm seeing it all the time because we can't get teachers in primary school anyway. All of them, every student I've spoken to, they have said their entire class, the student teachers, are just planning on emigrating as soon as they either get qualified, or they might stay for a year and get their, well, it was called a dip when I did it. I don't know what it's called now. You know, when they get their DRID, when they get their assessment from the inspector. Yeah, most of it's DRID, so it'd be the principal and someone else in the school doing it. But that kind of, it's like, I guess, when you're doing your doctor, if you're a doctor, and then you're signed off, and now you're a fully fledged doctor. So teaching is the same. You know, they have that 1 year when they finish. So they're all either leaving straight away, or they're doing their year and then they're going.
Well, you hear a lot. A lot of, say, family homes or couples that be teachers or guards or nurses, and they can't afford to buy a house near to where they live, near to where they work, and they've two stable incomes. They're absolutely essential workers.
Yeah. Yeah, that's us. Like me and Melissa, we're both teachers, and we were just so fortunate. And it's something I'm always conscious of saying, is that we were so lucky because we were able to live in her parents' house and we're able to save. I've worked for over 20 years now, and I can't remember the last time I haven't had two jobs. Like, I think even when I was 16, I was working two jobs. I was working for my dad, and I was working in retail, like lifestyle sports. I've just always had two jobs. It's just in me. But teachers, and I don't want to just beat on the teacher drum, but that's what I know. It's because I'm involved, so I understand it. But I know it's the same for nurses. I know it's the same for any career that childcare workers, any career that isn't paying 100 grand.
Yeah.
You know, and Dublin is becoming like a little mini San Francisco, where you need to be on mega money to be able to live there, whether it's renting or buying. Now,
but even in San Francisco, the point that you just made there, you know, the property there is very expensive, but there's huge homelessness there around the expensive property. We're at serious risk of becoming like that.
Yeah, I can't think of anything worse than becoming like America, to be honest.
No,
it's not a benchmark anybody
Absolutely
wants
not.
to be like. It's so polarized. You're either rich or you're, you know, the biggest cause of bankruptcy in America is cancer. It's getting sick.
It's awful.
So as bad as things are in Ireland, we are very lucky that we do have social supports there. That if someone does get sick, you can get looked after to a fairly high level, whereas over there, you know, it's just miserable.
Healthcare wise, you can, which is great, but you know, the financial supports for someone that are sick in Ireland trying to pay rent and stuff, that's another story. But let's, you know what, we won't go down that rabbit hole because it's terrible. But the government do have a history of knee-jerk reaction. Like, they brought in, you know, introducing build to rent planning legislation and co-living legislation, only to ban it again. You know, what are your thoughts on the idea of co-living? And you know, I would have thought that co-living would have been interesting for a certain cohort of people, say young students or people that were just qualified, working. They might like the idea of working and then living near to where they work, co-living together, you know, but they just banned it outright.
Yeah, I don't know enough about the ins and outs of it, but I know it wasn't going to be cheap. And for something like that to be palatable, I think it needs to be cheap, and it needs to be, okay, well, fair enough. Look, there's 6 of them sharing a kitchen, but they're only paying 400 quid each. You know, it's not too bad. But I don't think it was going to be 3 times that. I think 12 to 1,500 quid a room. And then it just becomes a massive cash cow. So the public backlash kind of stopped that from going through. But I also think there is a bit of a division between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in terms of housing policy. And I think there's a lot of disagreement between the two parties. And I think because it was brought in under Fine Gael and then Tara O'Brien being Fianna Fáil didn't agree with it. So it's an interesting one. Personally, I wouldn't live in it, but I'm not of that age. I'm sure people in their early 20s would. But it's I guess the argument for it would be, well, six people move into one of those co-living things, that maybe frees up 2 3-bed houses that had 3 independent workers living in them, renting a room each. That's now 2 family homes available for someone to buy and to move out from an apartment to buy the house. So I guess that's the argument for it, but I don't think the plans were there for it to build to that scale where it actually would have had an impact on supply.
But do you not think that we need all types of housing and living? Like, we need apartments, we need co-living, we need rent to buy, we need build to rent, build to buy. We need it all at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. And we do need more of everything, but we need way more of some things. And we need way more houses or homes that people can buy, whether that's an apartment or whether that's a house.
Yeah.
But people need to be able to buy somewhere. People need to be able to have that capital in their life because of our issues with rent, because of our issues with the RTB, the vulnerability of renters, how they can be evicted, and then the other side of it for landlords as well. Like, problem tenants are an issue and problem landlords are an issue. So there's just so many issues in the rental market and it's part of our kind of heritage here in Ireland, is that people just want to own their own home because that is how we look after ourselves as we get older. We're relying on this pyramid scheme to keep going up and up, and house prices to keep going up and up. We kind of haven't really embraced that idea of being able to rent into our old age because we don't have those securities that they have in Europe. So let's say, for example, there was a lot of talk about the no-fault eviction ban. Yeah. And Micheál Martin just said the other day that they're not going to bring that ban into place again.
Can you just explain that ban?
So there was a no-fault eviction ban. So that means you can't be evicted unless you've done something wrong. So if you're not paying your rent, or if you wreck the place, then grand, you can be evicted. But if you've got a lease, they can't evict you. And that was in place during the pandemic. And it was kind of labelled as an eviction ban. But it wasn't. If you look at what was in that ban, and if you look at how you rent elsewhere in Europe, that is the case in Europe. So you can't just be evicted.
Oh no, you go European in, cities. You know that's your home for as long as you want.
Yeah, and they can't evict you. Yeah. So the no-fault eviction ban we had here was basically just putting our rental legislation on par with the rest of Europe. So it wasn't actually an eviction ban, because you could be evicted if you were causing social unrest, or if you weren't paying, or if you're wrecking the place or whatever. They can evict you. Now, landlords will argue that it takes too long to evict a tenant. I agree. I think the RTB is not fit for purpose. It's archaic. It's awful, and that needs to be fixed. But the ban wasn't necessarily a ban. It just kind of gave renters a few more rights to put them a bit more in line with how it was in Europe. So in other countries in Europe, you can only be evicted if the landlord is literally moving into that place themselves. Other than that, they can't evict you if you're paying your rent and you have a lease. And they also have long leases. They might have 10, 15, 20-year leases. Whereas here, it tends to be, if you have a lease, it tends to be about a year. Okay. So there's just, how would you feel if you were in that position? Do you know, I would not be able to live year to year and think, do you know, I could be out next year and then we have to try find a home for our kids. You know,
no, it's terrible. I don't think anyone should have to live like that. Just the level
of stress you're living under,
yeah,
must be horrific. So I'm always conscious of that. We do need more of everything, but we definitely need more places where people can buy, whether that's apartments or whether that's houses. I think a lot of it could be freed up by increasing our social housing stock. because a lot of social housing tenants are in private homes owned by private landlords. I also think we have 160,000 vacant homes, and not derelict. That's just vacant homes, habitable homes across the country. Obviously, not every one of them is viable for someone to live in. A lot of them are in the middle of nowhere or whatever. But
are these holiday homes or are these?
No, it excludes holiday homes and
Okay.
it excludes derelict homes. So the last census goes into really good detail about this. So a lot of these, massive percentage of these are actually livable.
Okay.
A few of them might need a bit of work. But even 160,000 homes, if we're building 8,000 homes available to buy a year, that's 20 years worth of stock. So imagine even if we got a quarter of them. So imagine
that's people's homes that they own, is that right? That's people's houses
somebody
or
owns them.
somebody owns
Somebody
them.
owns them, but no one's living in them.
Yeah, okay.
So imagine even if we got a quarter of those on the market to buy, what that would do to prices.
Yeah.
Like it would increase supply by, so if we got 40,000 to buy, and if we're doing 8,000 homes a year, new homes to buy, it's not a perfect example, but let's say that's like 5 years worth of stock coming on the market the next day. What would that do to prices? They drop dramatically.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm not saying you CPO those out of compulsory purchase order. I'm saying, imagine you had a house that's not costing you anything. There's no one in it. You've no mortgage on it, and it's going up in value every year. Like, where's the incentive there to do anything? You'd be like, do you know, it's a bit of a pain in the arse. Like having to go around and cut the grass and all, you just kind of just leave it. It's not costing you anything.
Yeah.
It's going up in value. Whereas if we put in, say, a vacant home tax, or even, I think, a land value tax. So,
or property tax. That
well,
they
yeah,
have
our
in other
property
countries,
property tax is quite cheap compared to most other countries. But it's not even a property tax. So say that the value of the site. So let's say you have a tiny little house, but it's on 3 acres. Then you're valuing the whole site rather than just the little house. Do you know? So if we put a tax in on that and we say, look, we're in an unprecedented housing crisis. We need homes for people to buy. People are willing to buy fixer-uppers. People are willing to buy vacant homes. They're putting in the vacant homes grants and all that kind of stuff. Imagine the difference that would make if somebody... So let's say you have one of these vacant homes that's not costing you anything, but now all of a sudden it's going to cost you a few grand a year. Well, you just be like, grand, I'll just sell it. Sure, it's
kind of incentivizing people to sell their property.
Yeah, and we keep giving carrots, whereas I just think it's time to get the stick out a little bit. And
a small little piecemeal as opposed to just deciding on one big plan.
So they have put in a vacant home tax, but it's very, very small. So I spoke to Leo Varadkar and Dara Bryan about this. As it stands, it's about 3 times your local property tax. So it's less than 1% usually of the value of the house. So it's nothing. Whereas if inflation and house prices are going up and up, that it's costing you 1% of it, but it's going up in value by 10% every year. It needs to be the other way. It needs to be a big tax, and not even straight away, because a lot of those homes will be tied up in the fair deal scheme, which is when the owner of it has gone into residential care or into a nursing home, whatever. They can't rent it out because they have to pay tax on it. The fair deal scheme needs to be
scrapped.
Not even scrapped, but needs to be fixed. There are a lot of issues with it, but there are the reasons why people are sitting on these vacant homes. Most of the time, it's not just because they're lazy and it's not costing money. It's just like there may be issues with it. So you're saying to these people, okay, look, we know it's a problem, but in 12 months' time, this tax is going to come in. So you have a year now to sort out your affairs, whether it's getting the legal sorted, a probate, whatever it is. Sort it out. You've got a year, and then we're going to start taxing. I think that's a fair enough time to give people.
But there'll be absolute outroar if something like that comes in, wouldn't there?
Well, it's already in. It's just making it more. It's just making it more expensive.
Okay, but if you made it more expensive for people, would there be outrage by the people that own these properties? That's the thing is, and that brings you back to the problem where the government are trying to get votes and not annoy people.
But I think there's so many votes in that, because what's the reason for someone to be outraged? Because you're given a year, the house is sitting there doing nothing anyway. You're not making any money on it. It's a lot of them would probably be glad to get rid of them, but just maybe need that little bit of an incentive to say, look, get the legal sorted. Let's get it on the market and sell it and cash in. Like, make a fortune. The prices are at their highest ever. So a lot of these homes don't have mortgages on them. So it's I think it's a no-brainer for any government to do, because I think there are so many votes in it. If you sort housing, if I'm the leader of a government party, or if I'm advising a government party, if you sort housing, you'll be voted in for generations. The same way Fianna Fáil were for generations. But you can't just sort
housing in one sitting. Like, I mean, it takes years to build. Like, the fact that we haven't been building for years means that we have to start somewhere. And the issue is that it takes time to build. It takes, and it needs to be viable for the developers too. But even getting back to tax on housing. So I have a couple of figures here that I wrote down. So people don't know that when they buy a new home, they're paying 13.5% VAT on that home to the government, and VAT is 0% in the UK. Yeah. So say, for instance, now some might argue that if we reduce the VAT, it'll just increase the developer's profit, right? But for instance, if it's a risk, but just say we put in some kind of an incentive to say to the developer, okay, so you build a house and you can only sell it for, this is the top price that you can sell it for, and that's it. What are your thoughts on doing something like that?
Yeah, that's an argument that's always put across. I think it definitely needs to be looked into, reducing VAT or even removing it. The cynic in me would say, is a developer going to pass on that 13% savings to you? Probably not. But
if it was capped, if it was basically like...
Yeah, but they'll make it up somewhere else. They'll say the kitchen costs 13% more. Do you know? I can't see... Maybe I'm just so cynical because I've been doing this for so long, but I've never heard of a developer being that generous and saying, you know what, you can have the 13% savings, because the demand is there for them. They're selling anyway. No matter what they're pricing them at, they're still selling.
Okay.
So people are finding the money through whatever means, but the houses are selling. So I think the only thing that is going to bring down those prices is more competition and more supply. Okay, so there's no point in even like kind of going through the total tax on a new home was about 35%, when you consider levies, contributions, VAT, etc. So it's building more homes is what we need to do anyway. Yeah, it would be great. It'd be wonderful if that if we took off the VAT and all those levies, that it would make housing 35% cheaper, more affordable. It'd be brilliant. Yeah, maybe it would happen. I find it hard to believe that a developer will happily hand that money back. Yeah, okay. So go on to the other side, on the renter side. So I did get a few questions in from landlords, or comments. Ask about the vilification of private landlords and how they're being driven away from the market. Yeah. Because there is this thing of, all landlords are horrible and mean. And I know there are awful stories out there. And we've heard it recently where landlords are looking for sexual favours from people, which is just, it's unbelievable to think that we're at that stage in this country that people are actually doing that. But there is this sense that there is a vilification, and there's the accidental landlord too. So I'm sure you hear from all sides. What are your thoughts on that? I think I'm not anti-landlord at all. I have family and friends who are landlords. Well, not family, but relatives. The big problem for landlords is the law-breaking landlords. So I would be very anti-law-breaking landlords and very anti-law-breaking tenants. Yeah. I think anyone who breaks the law, or anyone who is not doing things the way you're supposed to, whether that's being registered or whether that's looking after the place you're living in, I think whoever is breaking the law needs to be punished. And whether that's a renter should be able to be evicted within a week, or whether that's a landlord who is asking sex for rent, I think they are the problem. And we actually have more landlords now than we did in 2016. but we do hear a lot about landlords exiting the market. So I don't know what the reasoning is for that, because we technically, the census has shown over I think it was last month, the census came out and it showed we have more landlords now than we did in the last census in 2016.
Okay.
So a lot of our housing policy has been designed around this idea that we've less landlords, but it's not true. We actually have more. So one explanation could be the increase in build to rent, the increase in institutional landlords. And
what do you mean by institutional landlords?
So basically a faceless kind of corporation. Most of them are American or Canadian pension funds or Chinese investment funds. So it's a whole corporation.
Is this what they call vulture funds?
Some people might label them as that. It's not actually a vulture fund though, because they're not like coming in and buying from existing stock. For the most part, they're building what wouldn't be there anyway. So they're not it's not their fault. They're they're building these things that no one else was going to build anyway. So it's not a big, it's adding more supply, just not enough. But it's that is one of the explanations as to how we somehow have more landlords, despite hearing that every landlord is selling their house. I think the vilification thing is a bit of hyperbole, to be honest. The only time you hear about landlords in the media or on the news is when they've done something illegal, whether it's asking for sex for rent or that landlord that tried to attack the man with a circular saw while his wife and kids were in the room behind him. Do you know that's where the vilification is coming from? It's coming from insane people. Okay. I don't think anybody has a problem with somebody who has a pension property and they're renting it out. There's, like in any industry, there's going to be the awful ones that give the whole society a bad name, whether that's whatever, teachers back in the day, Christian Brothers making every teacher look like they're beating kids. Do you know, there's always going to be those things in society where the minority that are doing something horrible give the whole profession or the whole industry or whatever it is a bad name. I think that is the case with landlords, that we do hear a lot about these awful situations and we don't hear enough about the really nice landlord who hasn't raised the rent on their tenants because they're struggling a bit. There are lots of them as well. It's just, that's the way news is. We don't have good news channels. News is always bad news. So it's always about something that's not good. We don't have a good news station. It would be great if we did. But so I get this a bit on my page from landlords, they're like, you're so anti-landlord or whatever. And I'm like, I'm absolutely not. But this is the reality that people are living with. And I have a thing about, I would love to be able to afford a house, a second house that I could rent out, because I think investment wise, long term, it's a phenomenal level of privilege to have. So accidental landlords might be listening to this being like, well, I bought in the boom and the house is worth less now than I paid for it. I've been really good to my tenants. I haven't raised the rent, or I've had really dodgy tenants over the years and whatever. And that's horrific. But if you think about long term, it always goes back to long term thinking, and think about what is that investment going to be worth at the end. It's always going to be worth it. You
explained it to me inside before we come in, so just explain it here about the $5,000 or whatever. So it was.
Being a landlord it's running a business. That's what it is. It is a business, whether you like it or not, or whether you went into that business by accident or not. It's a business, and businesses take a bit of work. I think during the boom, we were all sold this easy money narrative. And you buy a house, should be worth 200 grand more in 2 years, then you sell it, you move on to a bigger one. And it's the property ladder, that kind of, you have to keep climbing, which I think is bullshit. I hate that term, property ladder. It's just a home, buy a home and live in it. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? However, unless
we're talking about people getting on the property ladder in the first instance.
Yeah, but even that that insinuates you have to keep climbing.
I suppose, yeah, no, actually, I never thought about
why
it like
can't
that.
you
Fair enough.
just buy something and live in it?
Yeah.
But anyway, so I was trying to explain this to a few people who messaged me, and I'm like, okay, I know it's tough. Maybe your rent isn't covering your mortgage or whatever, but think about this, right? So if I ask you, okay, Laura, here's a savings scheme I've invented. Okay, you're going to put in $5,000 a year, so about 400 quid a month. You're going to put in $5,000 a year, and in 15 years, you will have put in 75 grand. But now your investment, I'm going to hand you back 350 grand. So you've put in 75 grand, but you're getting back 350 grand. Would you do it?
I would, yeah.
Yeah, we all would.
Yeah.
I just think it would be amazing.
Yeah.
So it's like an incredible pension. So think about that. So think about, let's say you're an accidental landlord. You have a property, you have a tenant in it. And because you're really sound, you haven't raised their rent. And now you're on a tracker mortgage, and now your repayments have gone up a little bit. And let's say the rent isn't covering the mortgage. It's actually costing you 400 quid a month.
Mm.
That's the same example. That 400 quid a month, $5,000 a year. Your mortgage might take 15 years to pay off, but at the end of it, you've a house worth, say, 350 grand. And that's being extremely conservative, because that's the average price of a home now. What's the average price of a home going to be in 15 years? Chances are a hell of a lot more than that. And that's not even taking into account, let's say you put $5,000 in, the interest you would make on that as well. Like, so it's a very conservative example would be $5,000 a year, 75 grand over 15 years, but it's now worth 350 grand. That's like likely to be the absolute minimum. And most people aren't losing $5,000 a year on their rental property. They maybe are breaking even, or maybe only making a small amount. But if you think of it long term like that, it's an absolute no-brainer. And it is a really privileged position to be in. I would love to be able to do that. But over those 15 years, of course, you're going to get tenants that are a bit of a pain in the arse. You're going to have to pay for new, get it painted, all the rest.
Yeah.
But like, it's not that long, 15 years. Imagine thinking $5,000 a year for 15 years, getting 350 grand.
It's like what was that special savings scheme back when I was in college?
Yeah,
the
SSIA, was it?
Oh my
was
goodness,
yeah. I wasn't able for that.
Were you not able for that?
It was a bit before, yeah.
I put a little bit into that, and like there was nothing like it. What was that? You put in a fiver.
Yeah, it's like that.
You put
free
in a fiver
money,
and you get back 6 or something. Like it was free money basically,
people
wasn't it?
taking out 40, 50 grand. Yeah, so that's just what I would say to anybody who is in that position where they feel like, you know, this house is a pain in the arse. It's costing me money every month. But think of it long term. Mm-hmm. I just think it's a fantastic. Like, I would love to be able to do it. I can't. I don't have the money. But yeah, it's a tricky one. I'm definitely not anti-landlords. I'm anti-law breaking landlords, and I'm anti-law breaking tenants. And I think I do everything by the book, and I just naively think everybody should do everything by the book.
Well, of course we all should, but some of us don't.
Property in Ireland is very much like
it's a little bit like a free-for-all. But actually, something that struck me there when you said, oh, you know, you're saying, oh, so I'm a landlord and I haven't raised the rent because I'm really sound, or I'm a bit sound. Like, it shouldn't be, the onus shouldn't be on someone having to be sound to not do that. It should be that people aren't in a precarious position where they're wondering or worrying when the lease comes up, is their rent going to go up by a third or whatever like that. Yeah. Like, that isn't, it shouldn't be down to soundness. There should be.
Well, we have rent pressure zones for that reason. They can only raise it 2% a year.
Yeah.
But then when their mortgage payments are going up, then landlords get annoyed because they're like, well, I can't raise the rent anymore, so I'm losing money now. So I'm just trying to maybe remind people to think that long term, at the end, it's going to be worth a lot of money. And that's, in that example, I'll say the $5,000, somebody else has paid off that mortgage really for you, which is fantastic. Imagine someone paying into your pension for you, like way more than what you've put in. It'd be amazing. So it's just something I just think it's a good way of putting it into perspective. But the whole thing about landlords and them all leaving the market and all that, I think there's definitely an element of truth to it when it comes to those that maybe had one or two properties and they're cashing in now because prices are really high. Interest rates are going up. They're like, do you know what? I'm out. I'm getting out, because they're worried about, there's all this talk about Sinn Féin coming in and, you know, your house will be repossessed. I think it's nonsense. That's like...
Sinn Féin are going to come in and take everyone's house. Yeah,
no, that's not the case whatsoever. I don't and I'm like politically homeless. If there was an election tomorrow, I don't know who I'd vote for, but I'm also conscious that I don't like this word, but I do have some sort of influence on what, because people kind of go to others to be like, oh, do you know what? There's just so much to know about housing policy, and this fella seems to know what he's on about. I'm just going to listen to him. And I remember listening to one of Blind Boy's podcasts, and he put it really well. He's like, imagine I told people to vote for a political party, promising them that they're going to fix everything, and then that party comes in and makes shite of everything. Like, imagine, like, that would be on me. Do you know what I mean? So I just tell people, like, I if there was an election tomorrow, I don't know who I'd vote for. I know who I wouldn't vote for, but I just think people need to, as boring as it is, they need to research for themselves. And it's really easily done when it comes up to a general election. It's so easy done because each party puts out their manifesto. Now,
but didn't you say yourself there, the manifestos are all kind of the same, and then do they really stick to them as well? So is it not a case of let's go out with our yellow jackets on and start like, going absolutely nuts? But that's a bit controversial, but like, honestly,
I think there should be protests. How do things get done? Yeah, I think there should be protests. I think this housing catastrophe we are in has impacted every part of society. It's how they're going to staff that new children's hospital is beyond me, because my school is right beside it and there is nowhere to buy or rent around there. It's extortionate, and like, I don't know where their staff are going to live. I don't know where they're going to get them. Doctors are all going to Australia or going to the Middle East or going wherever. Like, it's not a case where in previous generations, people were kind of, people may emigrate, to get some life experience or to have a few more opportunities.
No, they're going to live there, sure. But I have family over there too.
But like, we're talking extremely highly qualified people leaving because they don't see a life here that is in any way worth what it will cost them, and they're willing to, move that far away from family because it's like, it's a better quality of life. And to me, that is a real shame and a real embarrassment. It should be anyway for government, because that's what their policies have resulted in, that people feel they're better off living somewhere else. And I just, as a teacher, when you're educating the next generation, it's really depressing to think how many of these kids are going to want to leave. And not want to stay here and contribute, and by all means go off and do your couple of years away and get some life experience and all that, but there should be an option to come home if you want to, that you'll have somewhere to live and you'll have a stake in society. And that I just think that's really sad.
Oh, it is, of course. And it's those people, like you said, the highly qualified or even not so highly qualified, it doesn't matter, but not feeling they could even have a proper work-life balance here because the cost of living is so high. The cost of housing is so high that they just be working out of the home to keep to go back to somewhere where they're just keeping a roof over their head at night time. Like, that's, a lot of it what it boils down to as well. And then in terms of the viability of building, so you can't talk about, let's just build more housing without talking about viability for developers and for landowners, whatever you might call them. The building standards here are the highest in the world now. So we've gone from pre-Celtic Tiger apartments where you can't swing a cat in to now having the highest standards in the world, which make it more expensive. Okay, which means that, say, it might cost 200,000 to build the bloody thing in the first place. So then it has to make the developer money. So is that like saying we should all be buying Mercedes cars and driving around in them and not be driving around in cars of lesser standard? What can you throw a bit of light onto that as well?
There's a guy on Twitter who's really good at all this. His name is, I think it's Rob Cass. He follows me. I always see he posts so much about this, but it's very figure heavy, and a lot of it goes over my head. But he posted something the other day, and up in Belfast or somewhere up north, anyway, there was a new build for 135 grand, same quality as he built here. So it's on the same island. If they can build that and sell it with a profit at 135 grand, we should be able to do that here in the south. But most of the costs here tends to be the value of the land of what's being built on. And the argument against high rise is that it has shown throughout history that the higher you go, the more valuable that land is, because on that same square of land you can now get 200 homes on it rather than 20. So the value of that goes up, and it brings up the value of everything around it.
Okay.
And then the other issue with viability is we're very used to developments being built for sale, say your standard kind of 3-bed housing estates. So how a developer works on those is they build phase 1, they sell it, and they put that profit into building phase 2, they sell it, they roll the profit over. If you're building apartments, you have to build them all in one go. You can't sell the first 4 floors and then add another 4 floors on top once they're sold. So it's a different funding system. You have to have the money there at the start. So that's the kind of difference there when it comes to houses and apartments, and it's something to remember. And then there are, in my opinion, I actually have a really good business idea, and I don't understand. I've spoken to a load of engineers about it, and no one can give me an answer as to why it doesn't make so much sense.
Go on,
so maybe someone
me.
listening to this, I think this is a €1 billion idea. Anyway, I think it fixes a lot of issues, right? This going off topic, but let's say, just to go back to what you said, sorry, and then I'll give you my idea. Like timber frame, modular, all that kind of stuff that are part of solutions elsewhere. We're very slow to adapt to changes in technology here in Ireland. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because lobbyists, maybe it's because the cement industry has too much of a say, like a monopoly, and they don't want timber frame being built. There's issues around insurance companies are quite archaic on that. They maybe won't insure it. You can't get a mortgage for it because it's not classified as bricks and mortar. There are a whole lot of issues there that somebody more intelligent than me probably would need to unpick. But
I think you're doing yourself a disservice there. Not more intelligent, just more knowledgeable about the thing.
Yeah, like that's their gig, you know. So they know more about that. But imagine we could use other materials to build, which we seem to just be able to build using the same things. Imagine we were able to use other materials. So here's my idea, right? So I remember going to the science gallery in Trinity, and I saw this thing. I was like, this is so cool. So one of our biggest problems is plastics in the ocean when it comes to environment and stuff, right? Because I'm big on the environment. And so our oceans are full of plastic. Another problem with the oceans is we've overfished them. That's why we've seagulls all around us in the middle of the city, because there's no food in the ocean for them. They're coming into the city to get their food because we've overfished the waters. So we can't stop fishermen from fishing because that's their livelihood. However, imagine we said to them, right, you're not fishing for fish, you're fishing for plastic. All right, and use your fishing nets. I'm sure it's more complicated than this, but gather up all the plastic out of the ocean. What's something we have so much of in the world is sand. If you get plastic and sand, melt the plastic, add the sand in, you can basically create anything out of that plastic to mold it to whatever you want it to be, and it is solid. And
it won't be like mica.
No, it is solid. It won't be like mica. It's solid. It's a really good insulator. It doesn't degrade. It lasts forever. So instead of chopping down trees for wood, for timber and your roof structures and all of that, imagine we could make, like composites, say, like the composite decking or whatever. It's a mix of plastic. It's basically that. So I remember
seeing... There's not been an awful lot of pollution met by melting down that plastic in the first instance. And then what's the CO2?
But like it's taking the plastic out of the ocean.
I suppose, okay.
And then by not chopping down as many trees, then that's a carbon kind of, that swallows up all the carbon emissions. So trees take in carbon dioxide and put out oxygen.
Yeah.
So, and you don't have to like melt it. It's not like a big furnace thing. It's like you heat it up and it gets more pliable, and then you add the sand in. So there were students in Trinity that did it, and they made like tiles.
Okay.
And they were like basically these plastic tiles, and you can kind of create any design you want. You can put colours in and all. So it's unreal. Like they were really nice tiles, and they were like, if you drop something on it, they don't crack. They're a better insulator. They're a better sound insulator than normal tile. And it's just like a no-brainer. I was like, why can't we get rid of wood and make these like composite beams? And it's free.
So,
pretty
but
much.
composite beams or a house that was actually built with that material?
Yeah, so you can someone 3D printed a house there a while ago.
We'll wait for someone to get in touch with us about that, because I don't know anything about that. I do know a little bit about CLT though.
What's that?
Which is the cross-laminated timber. Now you're talking about chopping down trees.
Yeah.
And, you know, the fact that if we're chopping down trees actually, they absorb CO2 and they emit oxygen. But there is cross-laminated timber, which is used to build houses and even apartments in the likes of Scandinavia. Australia are doing it. North America are doing it too. And it's a much more environmentally friendly way of building than using concrete and steel. So, you know, with concrete and steel, I don't know what the actual percentage is, but there's something like 40% of global carbon emissions come from the built environment. Okay. And 12% of emissions come from new constructions. So the idea of cross-laminated timber is that it actually, if you look at it, it looks like a brick. And that can be used to actually build houses and apartments. And it's not the same as timber frame. It's actually, that is the building bricks. And they store the CO2 in them. So they're not emitting it the way, say, the likes of the concrete and steel will. But in Ireland, like what you said, we're very hesitant
for any change.
Yeah. And you have, you know, fire regulations and things like that. And people worrying and wondering about the fact that if you have a big building made of wood, for want of a better word, but it is, you know, it has its fire hazards done, and it has, you know, it has all those tests done anyway. But we're very reluctant to, I suppose, go down the path of let's see how this would work. Like we could, you know, grow our own trees, chop them down, replant them. Like there's ways for this, and we can be environmentally friendly while we're doing it. Like as it stands, you know, we're going to double our carbon budget instead of having it by 2030. And we need to build more houses. That's only going to emit more, if we're doing it with concrete and steel, it's only going to emit more pollution into the environment. You know, instead of like, you know, slapping the farmers on the wrists and telling them not to be, you know, having so many cows, we should be looking at other ways to do it when there's such a high percentage of global emissions due to building. Yeah,
I don't know why we don't, other than we're so resistant to change. But it kind of goes back to my point on the vacant homes, because they're the most sustainable to build because they're already built.
Yeah,
you don't need to. They already have services put into them. You don't need to do the electrics, the waters, for the most part. They're all there. They're just empty. So that's the most sustainable way to increase housing supply. And then we could look at, you know, the other alternative options. Yeah, like I don't know what the answer is, to be honest. I probably, like most things, just comes back to a real hesitance and resistance to change in Ireland. Like you almost need to force people into things. They don't know they don't know what's good for themselves. It's the same with health. Like you know better than anyone.
Yeah.
Like it's a real Irish thing. If someone in your family is like, no, you need to do this for your health, they won't listen. But if someone outside of the family says it, they'll listen. It's just it's something we do, isn't it? We're so hesitant to change. Some people. not everyone.
And why do you think, the much hyped fast build modular housing delivery model hasn't taken off here?
I don't know. I don't know why, to be honest. Like, maybe it goes back to this kind of dream we all have of, your 3 or 4 bed semi-D in your garden and whatever. But I think all options need to be explored. Sounds like a real politician's answer, but they just don't.
Have you turned into a politician since you sat down in that chair?
Never. They don't seem to really want to, look at these alternatives. I'm sure they have their reasons. Like, even I did a podcast with Varadkar, and there's a chapter in my book.
Get the book in there.
Yeah, I wrote a book.
What's the book called?
It's called How to Buy a Home in Ireland. And I put a chapter in at the end because there's so many things that we need to fix in the process of buying a home in Ireland. I've so many ideas, and some of them are so easy to fix. And he was saying he read my book. Now, I'd say he looked. I'd say he glanced at it in the car on the way over. But he said he liked the chapter on improvements that we could make, and one of them was on probate, and it's something I'm always going on about. So probate is when someone dies and the house is in the will, and it just takes so long. Like, it takes so long, 16 weeks minimum. It can take years if somebody, if one, yeah, exactly. And I just don't think homes should be allowed to be advertised for sale until the probate's sorted. Because what happens is you go sale agreed and you've got your loan offer, which is running out. You've only got a few months, but the probate keeps going on and on. Interest rates are going up and up. And your mortgage, when you went sale agreed on the house, was going to be 1,200 quid, and now with interest rates it's going to be 1,900 quid, and all of a sudden you can't get a mortgage for the cost of the house, and because it's all being dragged along because probate's taking for ages. It's a podcast in itself, but it's just funny because he was like, this is a really good idea. And he said, what did he say? He's like, so I want to sit down and look at it, and I'll talk to our advisors on it, and they'll tell us why we can't do it, and then we'll see what we can do. And I'm like, doesn't that just sum up?
Oh, doesn't it?
Doesn't it just sum up?
They'll tell us why we can't do it.
Why we can't do it. Instead of being like, we need to do what we can to get this done next week. Not next year. Everything is just so slow, and I just it just really stood out to me. He was like, and he kind of smirked. He's like, "Now tell us why we can't do it." And I was like, "Fucking hell, that just really shows."
Like the healthcare system too.
That shows why we are so hesitant to change here. Like, just that resistance to any ideas that might make things better.
I know. But it even goes back to the fact that we do see our house as our retirement and even, I know we were saying about the Fair Deal scheme, it's a good idea. Like, the Fair Deal scheme was a great idea in theory, although it does have its drawbacks, and now nursing homes are saying it doesn't even cover the cost of the care for the elderly. But, there is kind of a little bit of a shake-up of old world order as well. People are, say, able to run a business out of the back of their house literally now, and this idea of having a job for life as well is changing too. And maybe, the Irish mentality might change, that we don't necessarily need our bricks and mortar to keep, to cling on to for our later years. We could actually grow a business, and, God, 20-year-olds can do it, overnight nearly. You hear of it happening as well. So maybe all of that change is coming and will come.
I think financial literacy is an issue in every generation, but especially in previous. I think we've just kind of learned or grown up with that our money is tied up in our house, and at the end, but that's no use to you unless you've anywhere else to go.
Yeah.
So what use is a house worth $1 million if to sell it, to move somewhere else, you're going to have to spend more than $1 million on something half the size?
Yeah.
Do you know that the equity in your house is no use to you? It just gets passed on via intergenerational wealth to when you die to your kids, and then you pay inheritance tax on it and all that. So it's like, well, I think there is, and it's something I'm trying to touch on my page, because it's just something you kind of really get more into as you get older. But like pensions and investments, Like if we had a bit more financial literacy on that kind of side of things, where it's like, well, you know, it's not all about housing. You know, you can put your money into other things. They're really some really good, sustainable, good for the environment kind of investments you can make, and then that could be where your money is. But then you can also access it if you want it.
Yeah,
you can't sell one room in your house and access, you know, a third of it.
I know it. If you're an alien and you came down to Earth and you saw the way we do things, wouldn't you think it was daft?
Yeah, it was a lot of things that are mental that we just.
But even the fact that most people, well, before the COVID happened and we were all working out of the home, the fact that you work out of the home most of the hours of the day to come home to sleep somewhere where you're paying, where you're working to pay for, it just all seems daft, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Like we're all kind of at that point where we're working to live, and it just takes over. Yeah, unless you're lucky and you have a job that you love and whatever. Like I love my job and stuff, but I'd bloody rather not have to work. But like, it'd be wonderful. I'd love to be able to just, you know, float around and meet friends for coffee, and you know, it'd be lovely. But unfortunately, that's the capitalist society.
But you know, I think it's okay if you have to work. I think it's okay to work to be able to afford things that you like to do, but to work and have nothing left over at the end of the week or the month, or very little, so you can't enjoy life. Yeah, is desperate, and I think that's where a lot of people are, especially renters, and that's like. One of the good things to come from the recession and the collapse of the banks is that we have pretty strict lending limits. And I know you mentioned that earlier about, so say first time buyers now can borrow 4 times their income, and then the rest is 3.5 times. In the boom, you were able to pretty much, if you knew the right people, you could get whatever you wanted. Do you remember the ads on the television? Literally like 90... It was AIB or Bank of Ireland, and like young people coming in, I want this, and they're like, oh yeah, and do you want an extra bit, 10 grand for the couch or something, or an extra bit of money for the car for your new commute, because you're after having to buy in Kildare and you're working in Dublin. So I think one of the good things to come from all that is that your mortgage, the banks are so strict that they won't give you a mortgage for more than you're able to afford, and they have built-in stress tests for increased interest rates. So people are finding now they're getting to the end of their fixed rate, and now the new rate after that is going to be way higher. But because the banks had stricter lending criteria in place, they're likely going to be able to still afford their mortgage. So it means the chance of defaulting on our mortgages, unless you lose your job, is pretty low. Most people are going to be able to afford them. We don't have those in place for renters. There's no lending limit on your rent. You know, you could be paying 70-80% of your income on rent, whereas the banks have that criteria in place for your mortgage. So it's, again, the more vulnerable people in society, the renters, that are being hit the worst over and over again when it comes to when things are going up and up. So that's one of the good things about the recession and the collapse of the banks, is that I know I can afford my mortgage. Like it's if I was to rent my house, it would be at least 3 times more than what my mortgage is, because I got a good rate now. To be fair, we got like a 4-year green rate, 2.1%, and I know after those 4 years are up, I'm probably going to be paying at least double that, but I'll still be able to afford it, and it will still be dramatically less than how much it would cost me to rent the house I'm in. So that is a huge problem for renters, and as homeowners, we're lucky that we have those, in my opinion anyway, that we have the lending criteria, because you will hear a lot of people try and push towards increasing those bank lending limits, and 4.5 or 5 or 6 times. Well, yeah, I was going to ask you that. Do you think that if we did increase it to, I think in the UK it's a full percentage point more, or a full multiplication point before, 4.5 in the UK you can, you can get that, but we have exceptions in place. So banks can only give out, it used to be 20%, but now it's 15% of their loan book as exemption. So we got an exemption for buying our house.
got 4.5 times our income.
Okay.
And had we not got that, we wouldn't have been able to afford it because the prices were too high, and we get paid so little as teachers. So it's there are certain exemptions, and it's really for people who have a really solid application. So your teachers or whatever,
Yeah.
like we have a job for life and whatever. But the problem is if we relax those limits, that lending criteria, we are increasing people's spending power. So we're increasing demand in a market that is catastrophically low in supply.
Okay. So you're technically increasing the price of the property then as well.
So prices will just go up even more. And that's what we've seen from the government policies when it comes to housing. Their main one has been the Help to Buy scheme, which is on new build houses. Most policies the government have put in housing have been on new builds, in their words, to try and stimulate building of new builds. But it's been shown that the Help to Buy scheme, which is basically they give you money back from your deposit, that just adds on to the end. So you might save 20 grand on your deposit, but that 20 grand is added on to the house price, and then it's actually costing you 60 grand because you're paying your mortgage on that then over 35 years. So it goes, their demand side schemes is what they're called. So whether it's the first home scheme, which is when the government give you an equity stake, so you say buy 80% of the house and they pay for 20% of it. So they own 20% of your house, and if you sell it you have to give it back to them, and if it goes up in price you owe them more, if it goes down in price you owe them less. But they're all demand side schemes in a housing environment where we have so little supply. So you're just fueling demand but doing nothing to increase supply. So that's why I think we need to move away from those type of schemes and move away from basically what has become a transfer of taxpayers' money, because it's taxpayers' money going to private developers and they're laughing. But I think we need to do more supply side schemes as a government and less demand side schemes. But I don't see that happening.
Would you run for
No,
election?
never. No, it's the worst job. Like they work non-stop. And it's
You get my vote, Ciarán.
it's so abusive online.
Oh, I know.
And I'm always really like, I think by all means criticize the policies, but don't criticize the person. Don't get personal. Like if you don't agree with their policies, don't just say this is shit. Why is it shit? Educate yourself. Like have a conversation with them. And it's something like, because whenever I put anything like the comments under that Varadkar podcast, the reels I put up on Instagram, the comments are horrific. And
did you leave them up?
Anything that
moderate
I don't really moderate them now. So like Instagram hides some that have certain words in them or whatever.
Okay.
No, I just don't have time. Like
Yeah.
she'd be there all day. It's like 300 comments or 400
Oh, I
comments.
know.
But I keep an eye on them, and if there's anything outrageous, I delete racist comments. That's what I do. Anything racist I delete on my page. But even just like, and in the podcast, when people listen to it, I touch on this at the end. I'm like, this abuse, this is where we're gotten it. We are getting the type of people in politics now that, in my opinion, a good few of them, especially independents, are getting into it for the wrong reasons, and they're getting into it for money. And it's because, like, I would never get into politics because it's so abusive. And
when you say getting in for money, do you mean money that they get paid for being voted in, or do you mean
the power
backhanders?
that comes with it? And,
okay,
you know, like look at historically over the decades,
the jobs they get after being
and then that stepping stone onto the private sector, like Owen Murphy say, probably one of the worst housing ministers we've had. And now he's like, you know, he quit, and because it got him a job and a thing and whatever. That's grand. That's fine for them. They're not doing anything illegal. But what it means then, you're kind of not really getting the type of people in that I think will be good for society. Like, there are some politicians that I think are fantastic, but I worry how long they have in them, because especially if they're women, just the abuse. they get.
There's an awful lot of like really bad abuse that females get, females in politics, like from sexual comments to, you know, it's almost like an absolute free-for-all. I don't know
horrendous.
How any woman would go into it.
This is it, like, and I don't get much online. Like I get very little abuse, and it's because I'm a man, and that's not okay. And I'm sure you probably get, like, you know, in your DMs you might get some stuff. I'm sure you do. I think all women that have a certain level of following will get, but especially those that are, like, say on the radio or on the TV or whatever, and just that online thing. So it just, I don't get much, thankfully, because when I do, I tend to turn it into a joke, really, and I make fun of it. But that's it's because I'm a man, and I just think that isn't helping us when it comes to our government and who is involved in our government. Because would you run?
Absolutely, are you joking me?
No, nor would I. And I think it limits the type of people that we can get involved. Aoife Grace Moore does really good stuff on this. She's a political journalist, and I think she's a podcast out at the moment about this kind of stuff.
Okay.
And she talks about it a lot, as to, because she gets a lot of abuse, and it definitely impacts the type of person we get in that might be really good and might be fantastic at it, but they're not willing to do it because you're working every hour of the day, your life is on show, you're getting all these comments online. It's
very hard nowadays as well for someone like that to keep their family life private too.
Yeah.
Because everything is so open. So I think that, I can completely understand why someone wouldn't want to.
So I definitely wouldn't, like, ever.
Okay.
Not that I don't think I'd be good anyway, but I think there are some people that I see online that probably would be really good, but I don't think they would get involved, because, or they may get involved for a while, but I don't know what the longevity would be like if things keep going the way they are, where people can just say whatever they want online and there's no repercussions.
Yeah. Ciarán, I could talk to you all day. Is there anything else you want to say before I ask my two burning questions?
No, I don't think so. Like, I talk about this stuff all day. I could go on for hours. I guess it's just, you know, I'm always very aware that my page can be so negative, and I'm always trying to add some other bits in, even just for myself, for my own head, because I'm not a negative person. I'm quite a positive person, but I try and, you know, to throw a few jokes in, or I try kind of do different bits of content. But if someone's listening to this and like, Jesus, this is the most depressing conversation ever, I'm always also very aware that we're living in a period in human history where we statistically, despite what you hear in the news over the last few weeks, but we live in the safest period in human history ever, for us anyway, especially in Ireland. But we're not in war. I'm not worried about being killed on my way home, and I'm not living through the troubles, or I'm not living through whatever. Like, the bigger picture is, you know, things. Dublin isn't shit, and Ireland isn't shit. We have a lot of problems, but most cities in the world have these problems. I just think, you know, why not try be better?
Well, of course. I mean, and I think I'm very positive. I'm very much a glass half full, but you can't just go around with your head in the clouds pretending everything's okay when it's not. And it's only through conversations like this that maybe change will happen. Maybe the young ones will be out in the street protesting tomorrow now after this podcast goes out.
But I think, like, a healthy protest would be good. I think students should be. How students aren't out protesting at the moment is beyond me, because every year it's getting worse and worse for them to find somewhere to live. And when you go to college, that should be a time where you find yourself and figure out who you are and make new friends. You got a little bit of independence. A lot of students aren't getting that at the moment, because they're either being packed into rooms and they're sharing bunk beds with 6 other people, or they're still living at home. Now, I lived at home because I was in Dublin, but like 3-4 nights a week I was staying over in the lads' house, you know, who were renting, and they all had their own room in a big house in Booterstown. They all went to, like, I got to experience all that. It wasn't 6 people in bunk beds in a hostel, basically. Students living in their cars or having to commute a couple of hours to get to lectures, you know. I just think students they should definitely be out on the street. I think everyone should be, really, but, like, it's it's so unfair on them. And I'm surrounded by student accommodation at home. Where I live, it's all apartments, hotels, student accommodation. And I think like to get a room is like 1,600 quid a month. People can't afford that. Like, and I hear the accents going in and out of the place. It's all Americans, you know,
Really?
wealthy people. It's not, you're not getting, you know, lads from Cavan spending 1,600 quid a month. And it's just madness.
Yeah.
It's just madness. So, yeah, no, I don't really have anything else. I know I try and, like, my page is a bit, you know, I try to throw a bit of humour in, but I'm not saying everything is doom and gloom. I just think we need to try
and get our shit together
and talk and have conversations. And when politicians are knocking at your door, canvassing, have a little piece of paper stuck beside the door, because they will be canvassing soon enough, an election next year, that have a little piece of paper with your talking points, do your research and be like, okay, instead of just shouting abuse or not getting involved, just be like, these are the topics that are important to me. You're my local candidate. What are you going to do? And then try and research if you can, each individual candidate. So when I was interviewing for Agger, I kind of know his policies pretty well. So I was like, right, I'm going to ask him this. This is going to be his answer, because I know what his answers are.
He's going to skirt around the issue.
These are going to be his answers. So I'm trying to preempt what his answer is going to be and say, I know you're going to say we're building 30,000 homes, but only 8,000 were for sale. And then you're taking away his answer of 30,000. Do you know, didn't really work that well with him, but, you know, he's a professional. But have your topics there and just talk and engage and get involved and be like, do you know what? My kids are still living here. Your party has been in government for the last 12 years. Why should I continue to vote for you? Things like that. Get them. Don't just be like, oh yeah, grand, take the flyer and away you go. Like, I just think we need to have conversations. We need to try and have honest conversations, but productive conversations, and less aggression and more constructive kind of feedback or like just talk. And it's a very emotional topic, housing. It always is, always will be, because it's your home. And it's trying to convey that in a way that's productive, and instead of getting annoyed, being like, you know, other countries do this, why don't we do that? You know, Vienna is like the blueprint for really good social housing. Why can't we try and do that? Why can't we build modular homes? Why can't we try and make changes in this and see what they say?
And do you think, in terms of the social housing and apartments to rent or building to rent and that too, there's a sense of NIMBYism, whereas we're all like, oh God, the housing crisis is terrible, but goodness me, no one wants a big apartment complex with social housing there on their, right beside their housing estate or right beside their home, because it's going to devalue their home. It's almost like there's this a consideration that, renters or people that need social housing are less than others. There is definitely that NIMBYism that, that's a generational thing as well. That isn't just something you can wipe out.
Yeah, and like the Ballymun Towers and the Fatima Mansions, those type of things, but things that were built at a time when crime wasn't an issue and drugs weren't an issue, and then they became an issue. So they had these kind of ghettoizations. So they have kind of built into social housing policy. It's supposed to be mixed, like a mixed development. So some for sale, some for rent, some social, rather than being 100% social. But that's, you get a lot of that kind of classist commentary that social housing is going to be a problem. You're going to have problem people living in there. For the most part, that's untrue.
Yeah.
Like, I'm surrounded by apartments, I'm surrounded by social housing because of where I am in Dublin 8, and I don't have any problems. Do you know? It's those people. You also hear that they get these things for free. They don't. Yeah. They pay rent as well. It's not for free. It's just cheaper than what you're paying. But that's fine. It doesn't matter. It absolutely makes no difference to my life what my neighbour is paying on their house, whether they're getting it for free what's the difference between a social housing tenant paying a little bit of rent and someone who inherited the house for free? You know,
or someone who the intergenerational wealth has just been passed on via either college education, just a better standard of living overall, the way people are raised. But listen, that's like, we could go in.
Most problem neighbours aren't social housing tenants. Most problem neighbours are going to be, the curtain twitchers. Although I'm a bit of a curtain twitcher. Yeah. Well, I just like, because of where I live, it's very vibrant out there, and I'm on a square. I just like to see what's going on. I'm like,
that's fair enough. Bit of a people watcher. My mum was the same.
People watching. Yeah,
we were on. Mum came on holidays with us this year, and we were on the beach, and Mum was sitting up. I was like, what are you looking at?
Yeah,
I just love watching people. And she's like, I make up little stories in my head about what they, what they go home to or what they're talking about there, and it's gas. Whereas I'm on holidays, I'm lying down, just not thinking about anything, totally switching off.
Yeah, I'd be looking at it. I just think it's funny the amount of people that talk to themselves. If you notice that, if you watch people for a while, the amount of people, and I'm sure we all do it, but the amount of people that talk to themselves and they're walking around, it's hilarious. But that's life, isn't it?
Can I just ask you a little bit about your teaching? To totally go off topic. What class do you teach?
So the last few years I've had senior infants.
Oh my god.
Which are like my favourite age group. I love that age. They're just so fun and positive, and it's actually something that really helps me with my head. I'm very fortunate with my mental health. I've never had any problems with it. I am also very empathetic in terms of, I understand that people aren't that lucky and do have problems with them. I'm just lucky that I've never struggled with it. But with a page like mine, it's heavy.
Yeah.
The messages I get in every day are heavy messages. Like it's quite depressing. But going into school helps, because there's like, they're so positive and happy. Like, they put everything into perspective, and you just go in and, like, their biggest problem is they lost something from their pencil case or whatever. They're very cute. It's my favourite age group.
And there's no filter either. So they go in and they tell you.
Oh, they're gas, yeah.
And I was, my lads, when they were in whatever junior infants, senior infants, and you go and pick them up, and Miss Gary, they all loved her, but she was like, "Oh, now I was told what?
Yeah,
what happened at the breakfast table? Like, they go in and they just yap, don't they?
Oh yeah, they tell you everything. Like, it's like things that you really don't want to know, and then you have to look at the parents. But I've actually this year, now I'm back in on Tuesday. I've got 6th class this year, so I've gone from senior.
Oh my goodness, that's a big jump, isn't it?
6th class, yeah. But look, it'd be grand. I do prefer the younger ones now; they're very cute. But then the older ones have their benefits as well, because they can, they can read. Yeah. They can read and write, and they can do their own work.
Yeah.
And
you don't have to go into the bathroom several times a day to tidy up after them.
No, I do like infants, and that extra hour as well is really nice to just to plan and get your room organised and do Astra and all that. But so yeah, I have 6th class this year, so see how that goes. Should be fine. Yeah, it'll be grand. So I'm doing it long enough now, and I'm all right.
Okay, well, to round it up, I'd love to ask you what advice you give young people today, apart from paying into your pension.
It's that financial. I just think it's so important, but I don't have anything profound to say. I think for young people, often the skills we learn as a teacher, again, the skills we learn in school can very quickly become obsolete as you get older. Like, I wasn't great at English in school, but I've written a best-selling book. So I think lifelong learning is so important, and it's something I always try and instill in the children I teach, that even if, school's not for everyone, as we all know, but there's something that you're going to be amazing at, and something that you can learn about. We live in an age where you've literally got every piece of information every human has ever gathered at the end of your thumb. You can research anything. You can learn how to service your car on YouTube, whatever you want. It's out there and you can access it, and I think that's mind-blowing. So you might struggle with Pythagoras' theorem, but there's other things. If you can instill from a young age a love of learning. And it's, as we all know, it's way easier to learn something you're interested in. And often in school, you're not going to be interested in some things, but some things you will, or you might get that teacher that sparks something in you that I'm really into science now or whatever. So I just think it all comes back to an ability and a desire to learn, lifelong learning, and to always be able to re-educate yourself. And if the skills that, say, your degree is obsolete now, well, you can transfer those skills onto something else. And I just think you can learn anything, like, you know.
Do you know what you were saying there about lifelong learning and the fact that you're a teacher as well? So one of my teachers in primary school had a profound effect on my life. She was my 5th class and 6th class teacher, Mrs. Stafford. She's dead now, God rest her soul, but she was unbelievable, and I will never, ever forget her. And I think that you're teaching 6th class now, you were saying, but as a teacher, it's almost like there will be kids in 20 and 30 years' time that will remember you.
Know, and
you won't even know.
Yeah.
But that's lovely to think that you'll have that effect on people.
Yeah, it's great. It's one of the joys of the job, knowing that, you know, you can have it. Like, there's definitely, because I'm mad about bees. I'm obsessed with bees. I have been for years, since before it was cool to love bees.
Yeah.
And I did loads of work. I got beehives into school, and well, there's a whole other topic on that. Can
I get you back on to talk about bees?
Oh, I'm mad about them. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Biodiversity as a whole, but I just, like, bees are so important, especially because we don't have chocolate or coffee without them, which is very, you know, hard to live without. So, I just know there's definitely kids that, like, have left my class and they're, like, obsessed with bees now, or hedgehogs or frogs or whatever it is that I've done with them, and I'm like, does it matter if I didn't get all of, you know, the English lessons done that week, or we didn't finish that poem, but, you know, they've learned something else, you know?
Oh, listen, I absolutely think so. And actually, myself and my brother were sitting down last night at home, and I don't know how we got onto the topic. We got onto the topic of our primary school teachers, and both of us were able to name each one of them from junior infants all the way up to 6th class. Yeah. And we were both talking about, oh yeah, your man was a bit of a dick. But actually this teacher was cool. And yeah,
and we're lucky now. Like, I just think the type of teacher I had in primary school, I went to a Christian Brothers school. There's a fair few of them that were horrific, you know, and they're becoming more and more rare.
Oh yeah.
And teachers are getting more and more just dedicated, and because you kind of have to be. It's not a job you do to make money, you know. You have to really like it, or you won't last. So it's
you say they're getting more and more rare. I think they're getting more and more young. Every time I go in, I'm like, how is this 12-year-old teaching my child?
We're just getting older, unfortunately.
And Ciarán, my final question is, what is the meaning of life?
Yeah, you sent this on to me. I don't have anything profound to say. It's that, like, you know, it's the question that's asked of every philosopher throughout history. But I think, for me anyway, I think it's everyone's meaning is different, and for me anyway, I think it's your legacy, how you leave the earth when you're dead. Because I just think we all become worm food, or if you get cremated or whatever. I'm not a religious person, so it's what you leave after you've gone, in terms of how, say, my kids or my grandkids remember me, or like there's that thing they say, you know, you die twice when you die, and then when the last person says your name. So I think that the impact you can leave on people, whether it's, you know, for me, like, maybe I've left a book, like that book will always, you know, be in the sphere, I guess. But just that impact you have on people, whether it's, you know, making their day a bit better, or making them, if you're making them laugh, or if you're making them feel better. I just think the meaning of life is that human interaction, and how the stamp you leave on people when you're gone.
Ciarán, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I'm definitely getting you back on to talk about the bees.
Oh yeah. I've a few hours of me on them.
Okay. Lovely. Thanks a million.
Thank you so much, Laura.